Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of The Leading Issue. I'm Anne Francke, the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Martin McTague, the National Chair of the Federation of Small Businesses. Martin has himself run 3 businesses and is an expert in many different areas from policy to engineering. He sits on many government committees, and of course the FSB, as a member of the B5, regularly meets with ministers and the opposition. Martin, welcome today. I'm delighted to have you with us.
Hello, Anne.
So let's get started. Tell me, Martin, how did you get involved in advocating for small businesses? What led you to do this work?
Well, I think we're going back to the late 90s, and I was running a business up in the northeast of England. And at the time, this was a very transactional arrangement with the Federation of Small Businesses. Essentially, what I was doing was signing up a deal that returned as much value as I think it was costing me. It wasn't long after that, though, that I started to think, well, it's really important that small businesses have a voice. They don't really carry the same weight as some of their bigger brethren. So I felt that the advocacy role was much more important. And that's when I started to get much more involved in that side of the FSB. And that really has dominated everything I've done with the FSB since.
Mm-hmm. And while we're on the topic, and of course you're still advocating, but in your time advocating on behalf of small businesses, what achievement in that role of advocate are you most proud of?
I think the period that was the toughest was during the COVID pandemic, where a lot of businesses were seriously in danger of failing because of the exceptional circumstances that were around at the time. And I was particularly proud of what we were able to do to persuade government to take that need seriously and introduce some protections. One of which was the bounce back loan arrangements, which saved a lot of businesses. Also, the work we did on providing support for self-employed individuals as opposed to those working for companies. And then, of course, that followed into when the energy crisis hit during the early stages of the Ukraine war, getting an energy deal as well. So those 2 things, I think, stand out to me as being big achievements that I'm proud of.
Yeah, rightly so. Very, very important lifelines for many small businesses.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the cost of living crisis that's still with us. But we also have skill shortages, and we have a growth issue. We need to get the economy growing. And what would you like to see and in your view, what are the most effective routes to accomplishing those objectives for small businesses?
Well, I think the history is for our economy over many decades now that if you're looking for growth, it isn't usually the big incumbents that generate that growth. It's the smaller businesses, the fast-moving, innovative businesses, the disruptors that do that. And I think that the answer, therefore, is to focus a lot more time, attention, and resource on those businesses. Now, I know you'd expect me to say that, representing Federation of Small Businesses, but I honestly believe that is the best way of delivering a better economic outcome for everybody.
Okay, so focusing on small businesses, and how would you say that small businesses should go about solving their considerable skill shortages in a number of areas?
Well, the biggest problem for a lot of small businesses is they're competing for scarce labor resources with big companies that are much better equipped to provide valuable packages to those potential recruits. However, I think what small businesses have started to realize is their biggest asset can be that they are purpose driven, that their culture is driven by the owner. That's a very short jump then to the employee. You can sense the culture as soon as you're a part of the company. They're much more flexible, much more adaptable. So I think those kind of things have started to count much more for a lot of people who are wanting to join businesses. Probably Gen Z I would say, are even more tuned into these things. And they're the people that are hardest to compete for. So I think that's the way small businesses are competing for labor.
Yeah, there are a lot of things people value more than a big pay packet. And you've touched on many of them. The culture, a sense of purpose, flexibility. We know at CMI that people very much value those things. Do you think that your members, the small businesses, also recognize the value of good management and leadership skills as a means of growing their businesses?
Yeah, I think they do. I think there's an increasing number of businesses that do. And we recently surveyed a large number of small businesses, and 26% of them recognized that this was the dominant issue in managing to grow their businesses. Now, that might not seem a lot, but in reality, that is quite an important group of the small business community who are now focusing their attention on their own skills and their own leadership style. I think the biggest problem they're going to have, though, for the majority of the 70-odd% that don't think that, is that they don't have the resources, they don't have the time to be able to focus on that. Many of them are concentrating on survival month by month rather than looking further ahead. So if we can give them the resources to be able to do that, I'm confident a larger number will come around to that view.
Great. I hope they do, because obviously it's a key driver of growth and productivity. And as you say, it's great to know that 26% understand that. Of course, there's still many that don't, but we have to start getting that 26% perhaps involved and get them growing and using them as role models.
Absolutely.
And what have you seen work well to encourage small businesses to get training or get help? For example, we have programs like Help to Grow Management aimed at small businesses. Do you think that's playing its part? Are there other programs you've seen that work or would like to see?
Yeah, I think the best programs are usually modular. They're usually something that requires a much more focused attention on particular issues. I think the ones that are that small businesses struggle to take up are the ones that involve a lot of upfront commitment to both time and money. I think in many cases, if they can see that they can look at a sort of modular arrangement, then they know that's much more digestible. That I know this is an old cliche, but time is their most limited resource.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And what do you make of the Help to Grow Management scheme aimed at small businesses?
I think part of the problem with the Help to Grow is that it is too rigid. It requires too much time, and I think many of the people that have taken it up, and I understand something like 3,000 businesses have gone through it so far, are the ones that I think were already sold on the idea. But I think what you've got to do is you've got to widen it to a much bigger cohort of businesses, and that means you've got to be a lot more flexible. So I'd like the structure to be looked at again. I'd also like it to be something that builds in good practice at very new businesses. So if you're a startup and you have no idea about what is good leadership and management techniques, maybe you should learn it at the beginning rather than when you've been running a business for 20 years and you're trying to get a retread.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Are you in favor at the moment? I think it's capped. You have to have I think it's 5 members in your team to qualify. Do you think that should be lifted and it should be available to really micro businesses of 1 or 2 people?
I do, because I think for the reasons we were saying before, I think a lot of new businesses, that's a good time to establish good practice, good procedures, good methods. And often they're businesses that are at a stage where they've only got a couple of employees. But if you can get it right at that stage, you're going to embed good practice for decades to come.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. Now, you've spoken about the importance of helping small businesses gain access to the apprenticeship system, and you and I have spoken about that. What is your view about the apprenticeship levy? Do you think on the whole it's been a good move, and what improvements would you like to see?
Well, we're strong supporters of the levy because we think it's an important way of improving the overall skills in the UK economy. But I think part of the problem is that, especially since 2017, it has essentially become designed by big business for big business, and it needs to get back to some of the basics which we think are missing. Now, I know that for many businesses, the relationship between the large business and their supply chain is absolutely essential to the success of that organization. So I think a lot more could be done to encourage transfers down the supply chain, to make sure those transfers work effectively. Judging from what we've seen, the weakness seems to be in providers. There are too few providers, too scattered around the country. And I think that makes it very difficult for small businesses to recruit. If you take one example, if I don't know, say a Rolls Royce comes and says they want 15 or 20 apprentice engineers, then a local service provider can do that very quickly. However, if you've got a whole scattering of different small businesses with different needs, it's hard for them to respond to that. And I think that's an area that is a real weakness at the moment in the system.
Yes, it's a very fair point. And of course, there is some complexity in the apprenticeship administration, all the rules and regulations, which of course makes it economically unattractive for providers to go in places where they have to offer multiple programs, and it's quite expensive for them to deliver. So perhaps that's related to the lack of providers. Do you see that as well?
I think that's a fair point. I mean, we were only talking to somebody who was essentially aggregating levy payers' funds and trying to find apprentices in small businesses. And although they've managed to aggregate significant sums, they were still struggling to find apprentices. And when we asked them about what the source of the problem was essentially that they could not get the training providers to make the tie-up between the small businesses and their potential donors. So I think that is at the core of the issue. But, you know, essentially, small businesses, and this is a gross generalization, are more focused on younger and lower qualification apprentices than their big business brethren. But that can change.
I was just going to ask you that question about age. Some people are saying that there are too many mid-career apprentices. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's actually a good thing that it's open to people of all ages who maybe want to upskill or reskill?
I don't think there's any problem with people wanting to upskill or reskill. The problem is that I think the emphasis has changed dramatically from one that's training brand new skills with young apprentices to one where it's more of a retraining program now. And I think that's going well away from what I think the apprentice brand stands for. You know, if you go around the world and you talk to people about what does it mean to be an apprentice, it very rarely means a retraining program.
So yeah, it's a fair point. I've said in the past that apprenticeship levy isn't perhaps the best name for this, simply because people associate apprentices with young people, and they associate them with, in many cases, vocational skills, whether it's bricklaying or hairdressing. And actually, this is a program that is much broader than that, and brings with it its advantages in that you can do things like aeronautical engineering and management and leadership. But of course, that challenges for many people the notion of what an apprentice is at its core.
Yeah, absolutely.
That said, we do have some research that, at least in the case of management apprenticeships, it has been a success in that it has been attracting people that come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, which is a good thing. And also it's been attracting apprentices from the lower productivity areas of the UK. So at least from what we've seen from our data, there are some definite positives. But I also wanted to ask, what else do you think you would like to see government do? You mentioned getting more training to more young people in areas throughout the UK. Is there anything that you'd like to see government and businesses do together that you think would do that?
Yeah, I think the focus needs to be on training providers, though. That's where the resource is needed. We're currently involved in the LSIPS program, where we're trying to forecast future demand and then arrange the resources to meet it. Although that was well-intentioned and it's clearly targeted at trying to provide the users of the future or the skills of the future, it is a very difficult thing to predict, and it's proving extremely difficult to try and predict where this is going. You've only got to think of, for example, the AI revolution. Now, where is that going to lead? Have we really got any idea what kind of resources or skills are going to be needed in less than a decade's time? So I think we have to be very flexible and very resourceful when it comes to deciding skills policy. But it is absolutely essential to the success of this economy.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very fair point. So I want to turn a little bit to culture and leadership. I've been in the headlines a lot recently, in many cases for all the wrong reasons. If you're looking at your own career and your own leadership, what are the lessons you've learned about what makes a successful leader?
For me, and this is a very personal thing, I've always tried to encourage an open and diverse management style. I believe that isn't just about being PC, that is about getting good results, because a more diverse, more open management style generates better ideas. And the second thing is I believe in a more collaborative way of working, less hierarchy. Now, with an organization like the FSB that's around for 50 years, you have to change that. There's quite an established hierarchy. We have to work to try and make the whole process more open and more less hierarchical. But then the third thing I think is essential, which I think points to the kind of things that you've been talking about that have been in the news recently, is you have to have safeguards in there, because there will always be bad actors. There'll always be people that are likely to try and abuse either their power or position. And I think you have to have the ability for anybody subject to that kind of abuse to whistleblow, and that they've got to have confidence that whistleblowing will lead to something constructive.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. We've talked about this before. If you discover those bad actors and bad apples in your organization, you have to have processes that support their swift discovery and removal when necessary, right? So I think that that's a really important point. And also your point about open and flexible, transparent leadership and collaborative leadership. All of our research shows that actually, as you said, delivers better results. So we wonder, why don't more people do it? Because, again and again, we see workplace issues arising from accidental managers and leaders who are in there and have not been trained. We see those behaviors that are at best counterproductive and at worst can lead to some serious problems. Are we getting to a point where you think a greater recognition of professionalizing management and leadership would make a difference?
I think people are recognizing that this isn't, I love your phrase, accidental management, because I think it is the experience that most small business owners go through. They'll come in with at least part of the management skills they need when they're starting a business, but they have to learn so much more because they become the complete range of services that most big businesses would take for granted as provided by somebody else. They have to be, the master of all these different, skills and objectives. Now, I think the biggest problem here is recognizing that you have to have the resources and the time to devote to, dealing with those shortcomings. And I think the problem with a lot of small business owners is they're in a survival fight. They believe that the issue is not about them becoming better businesses, but it's surviving from day to day. And once you're in that kind of survival mode, where you're thinking about how you're going to get through to the next day and the next week and the next month, it's very difficult to get off that sort of, slow progression and look for something that will accelerate your progress.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. People often say, to grow, you often have to stop being in the business and start thinking, working on the business, right? Taking that step back, which of course, if you're fighting for survival, is very hard to do. I wanted to ask, before I ask our final question today, you mentioned Gen Z and their affinity maybe for starting their own businesses, whether it's Gen Z or we've also been hearing a lot about older workers wanting to stay in the workplace longer. And maybe some of them want to start their own business. What advice would you give to our listeners that want to set up their own small business?
Well, when I started my business, I was only in my 30s, and I think it was more a desire to take control. And I think for many small business people who start very early on, and in fact, some of the millennials who are now, trying to reclaim some control over their lives, I think it's not about making a lot of money. It's about doing something you enjoy, you think is worthwhile, and you've got more control over your working life. And I would say people who are happy doing that usually end up running more successful businesses. So I would say stay focused on how you can find a business that you're proud of, that you can see is giving you the right kind of work-life balance, and the chances are you'll do a good job of it.
Well, that's great. I'm sure that's encouraging to many of our listeners today. Now, of course, my last question, and we're asking all of our leading issue participants this: if you were in charge and you had to focus on one issue or challenge that you would focus the government, society, and businesses on, what would it be?
The biggest issue for me that has been like a thorn in my flesh ever since I started doing, being actively involved in advocating for small businesses is late payment. late payment has been a really awful part of our business culture for as long as I can remember. And it seems to be that big businesses have decided that they can abuse their supply chain. They can treat them with contempt. And I would really like the government to take that issue much more seriously, because I believe that it's what's holding a lot of small businesses back. The average small business in the UK has to double its working capital to deal with late payment. That is completely wasted resource. If only they could plow that into something more productive, I think we as a country would be in a much better place. So for me, the number one issue by a long way is late payment.
Well, that's very practical. And I was not aware that small businesses had to have double the working capital to deal with it. So it sounds like, a very important thing to focus on.
So.
Martin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us today. It's been great chatting with you. And I'm going to make sure that we do our bit to support the end of late payment. And I know that you will help us to convince those many accidental managers out there that they can professionalize their management and leadership and be all the more successful for it. Martin, thank you so much again. And thank you for listening.